Welcome to Totally Classic. This is the show where at least twice a month we get together and talk about things that might cause a attention response in a lot of people. And Andy and I started this a few years ago as an attempt to navigate or even model what we thought was missing in the collective space, which was speaking to those you disagree with. That has come up a lot in the news, actually, since the last time we recorded. But we consider pursuing things in curiosity and love perhaps the best path forward to understanding each other, even when we diverge on how to accomplish what we all want to accomplish. My name is Brendan McNamara. I'm an actor, writer, storyteller, and I don't know, multimedia obnoxious person.
And I'm Andy Swindler. I'm an entrepreneur and sometimes podcast host. I'm currently building an AI relationship navigator to guide couples from conflict to connection. I'm doing that with my wife. So we get to practice it and test it quite a bit. It's called Kogo. And today is a very, very special day at Totally Classic because we have our very special first guest ever. Jake Ward, welcome.
Thank you, guys. I can't believe you've let me into your bubble. I'm Jake Ward. I'm a veteran technology journalist. I've done this for a long, long time. I try to take some wisdom from the people around me, and so I'm very inspired by you guys. And I really appreciate being brought into the safety of the bubble you have built here. And so, thanks for trusting me with that.
Well, thanks for stepping into our bubble. So the question, every week we ask a question can be answered in binary, and then we spend quite a good amount of time exploring how difficult it is to actually ascertain how certain any binary response can be. But we will still kind of almost like the monk debates at the end, we'll also like pre-vote and post-vote to kind of see, oh, has our mind been changed? Has our mind been expanded? Because I don't know about you guys, but I've confronted a lot that people are just like, you can't change anybody's mind. I don't think that's entirely true. I think it is becoming perhaps harder and more easy in multiple ways that we'll talk about today. But I have found this very profitable as a means of changing my mind every single day, actually, even, perhaps on an incremental sense more than from a binary flip. But today's question is AI bias an existential crisis? And so I'm super excited to have our last guest was literally AI. Now we have someone who's not only reported on but written a book about the subject. And then and Andy, you're developing an AI for conflict resolution. I honestly don't think there could be a better triumvirate amongst people within limited connection. But my pre-vote is yes. Is a thumbs up. I believe it is an existential crisis only currently beginning to unfold.
I am also going to give that one a thumbs up as a pre-vote.
I will also, as the author of a book about how our brains are not prepared for what AI is going to do in amplifying our cognitive shortcuts and our biases. Yes, I will also vote that way. I don't know how the three of us are going to change each other's minds over the course of a thing if we've all gone
I
into it
know.
this way. But I'm in. Let's try it.
Yes.
Let's,
Well,
let's
Dang,
this
we
try
need
it.
a dissenting vote. Oh.
I know this is a
Yeah.
double. This is a double rarity because typically the questions we ask, we are. I don't know if we've maybe only twice out of 70 we've ever been on the same side at the beginning. We've ended up on the
Uh,
same side maybe three times after
mm.
starting on opposites. But this is an interesting one. But I think here, in some ways, that unanimity from multiple perspectives is helpful to indicate that this is something worth exploring. Um, any of you guys want to jump in as to why it was relatively easy to say yes?
Well, I'll kick it off with
Yeah.
just sort of the journey that I took on this topic. The book that I'm referring to came out in 2022. It
Yeah.
was January of 2022 that I released this book, The Loop: How AI is Creating a World Without Choices and How to Fight Back. And I at that time was a NBC correspondent, and I'd worked at Al Jazeera and Popular Science, and I had in my life gone through many, many iterations as a technology journalist. But I also took a detour into a PBS series that I got to do called Hacking Your Mind that was all about
Mm.
how human beings make decisions and about the biases that tend to guide those decisions and the ways that those biases are very easy to play on and
Yeah.
manipulate as a political speaker or as a marketer. And so I wrote the book because I saw this convergence of these pattern decision, these pattern recognition systems in AI and these patterns that were being manipulated in sort of the open intellectual market. And I
Yeah.
thought, this is a problem. There's a huge problem coming down the road. And I was very, at the time there wasn't much to point at other than sort of
Yeah.
general examples around. I mean, there was a lot to point at. There already was some algorithmic decision-making stuff happening,
Yes.
but but it wasn't. So the book gets published 2022, January 2022. It's the end of that year that ChatGPT comes out. And
Yeah.
so everybody in the beginning
Yeah.
of my releasing that book, including at NBC, I think, were like, "Hey, nerd, what are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And then it wasn't for another year that everybody suddenly the world was full of people with books about this, about warning us about AI. But my
Yeah.
big thing was I was not worried about, I remain unmoved by the idea that we're going to be enslaved by conscious robots,
Yes.
that the Terminator is our problem. I think
Yes.
idiocracy is our problem,
Yeah.
and that we're gonna, and so for me, it's about the ways in which our very most ancient instincts make us a target for marketers. And the more that they can amplify those instincts, the easier we are to sell to. And AI is the perfect way to do that, as we can get into, and I'm sure many different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. My exploration came from, it felt like in my circle, I was a late adopter of AI or LLMs, especially, probably only dominantly using them in the past year and a half. So, but should have read your book first. This would have surprised me less.
If only I'd marketed it properly.
I think that's
That's
every
that's
published
on me.
author's problem. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's on
We're
me.
always like, I feel like the book is great.
Yeah.
Not enough people agree and bought it. Well, people don't want to buy anything unless they are compelled to by fear. And in some ways, that's here.
Mm.
And I found, for me, I discovered this in simply, I was like, I don't know how to use AI. I don't know how to use an LLM. So I just sat down and I was like, let's just do how I figure out any person, which is to talk to them for as many hours as they can handle it. Now, the stamina of LLM is longer than your average person, except maybe my mother. She can talk for about 2 hours without necessarily pausing.
Maybe she's the solution we've all been
She
looking
might
for.
be.
Yeah. She'll exhaust it.
She's primed for it. And I started to ascertain just in the responses. I've been a journalist. I've been a writer for a living for most of my time, lasted like 25 years, and I've been an actor since I was 4. And a huge part of acting, as much as people like to think of us as silly, we are, is textual analysis, is analyzing who a person is by how they speak and literally what words they use. So to me, I started noticing very quickly. I was like, wow, you caveat very particular in certain areas that you don't caveat here, and you're very protective of certain sections of society more so than others. And then for me, I just started to interrogate, like, well, wait, where else do you do that? And I actually just used AI to identify its own biases. At this point, I started to be curious about it. Stanford, I know, has run multiple experiments and has noticed like a left-leaning bias, which I think is a little limited in terms of at least the ability for every single AI I've used, which is only Chat, Claude, Copilot, Gemini, and I feel like I'm forgetting one.
Well, there's only a
Is that
handful
all?
of foundational models. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. It was that. I've started using Gemini very heavily in the past month because that's the AI that is made contract with the government to be incorporated into government computers, and it's coming into our public schools here by the end of the year. So to me, that's the crisis, the idiocracy crisis, actually blends with like these patterns we've seen. We've all seen the data on it that like we are getting less able to read and understand things. Our eighth grade average reading level in this country is shrinking.
Mm.
High schoolers are less able to critically think because they're less able to read and analyze that which they're reading. So we're starting to have like you're talking about, we do have a culture where the average, I would even say, critical thinking or ability to reason, uppercase R, is limited to a potentially even a minority of the population. So to me, it's the convergence of this, of like a manipulation factory with the inability of the populace to actually engage with what is.
Mm.
Andy, come on in, buddy.
For my part, my first AI experience was in 1985 on my Apple IIc with
Yes.
Eliza. which, had been created something like 20 years earlier. And it was pretty cool. Just even the idea of talking with a computer in some point. And, I was pretty young. I was about 7. So I think it got rooted pretty early that we might be talking with our technology in that way. Now, Eliza turned out to be pretty easy to game. All you had to do was mention the word mother, and it would go into this whole Freudian thing and say, "Tell me about your mother." Um, but really pretty remarkable. Since then, I have tried to talk to every computer I've ever encountered. Brendan surely recalls in our dorm room in the late 90s at college with my Mac saying, "Tell me a joke,"
Yeah.
which turned out to be pretty much the only thing you could reliably get a Mac to recognize.
And I can't say it was that funny.
No, they were horrible jokes. And then fast forward quite a ways, 2022, I was part of an AI DEI startup where it was like an AI co-facilitator. And Brendan and I have done numerous episodes about DEI. It's an issue we have a clearer separation on in a lot of cases. And and then that was also the year I started playing with AI, image generators. So, but it was actually a little bit later. Then I lagged a little jumping on to the full LLM bandwagon. So Jake, I give you a lot of credit for being right there and noticing that pattern, the intersection of that pattern. Somebody who's pretty notable in the arena, of course, Tristan Harris. Saw him speaking on Friday, and he basically just described AI as a booster rocket, and whatever we strap it to, it'll just go in that direction. So I think part of the question
Yeah.
is like, well, what are we strapping it to? What have we already
Mhm.
strapped it to?
Mhm.
Um, and for when I think about bias, I mean, this is related a lot to like what we're building, is noticing, not only the bias that's baked in, right, in the training of these LLMs, but how does it reinforce our bias? And one way it
Yeah.
does that is they're sort of, I think, correcting this a bit, but they're basically trained to be sycophants and to reinforce. They're like this little mini echo chamber that makes you feel super groovy about yourself, uh, which is in many cases just reinforcing your own bias. So
Yeah.
one of the experiments we're running is, well, what happens if an AI could talk to 2 people and not just have 2 people in their own echo chamber, but actually somehow merge that and at least have an AI that's talking to 2 people and managing that together. So
Hmm.
How
For me,
did you? Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead, Jake.
well, I was just gonna say I'm interested about this because I think that I mean I don't want to fast forward too much, but right, one of the big difficulties that a lot of people in that same Tristan Harris kind of arena. So one of his co-founders of the nonprofit he runs, the Center for Humane Technology, uh, Asa Raskin is his name, was a guest on my podcast, The Rip Current, recently, and his whole, one of his many scary warnings, and that guy is a bummer to hang out with. You think I'm a bummer? This guy is a bummer to hang out. He's great. He's great. I mean, let's be clear. He's a brilliant thinker about this stuff, but he's very scary. And one of his very scary points is, yeah, this information bubble that we currently have, thanks to social media, in which you are insulated only among the people that you agree with, is going to get vastly worse when AI can simulate all of the comforts of a social group without actually
Yeah.
having a social group, such
Yeah.
that you are, really held in this tiny little sealed, hermetically sealed bubble. So when we talk about bias, and Brendan, I don't know, well, let me pause there. You were going to ask a question. Go ahead.
No, it's actually prompting the towards you. I was like, well, how did you? Because you saw this way before I did, years before I
Mm.
did. Was there an inciting incident, like a single, or
Yeah.
even for me, it's always three. If it's one, I go, right, let my intuition just kind of buzz and be
Yeah,
quiet.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's writer stuff. That's magazine editor
Yes.
stuff, right?
That
Three is a
is
trend.
three
That's
is a
right.
trend. So yeah,
Yeah.
same thing in comedy. So I was like, first time I was like, oh, that's a little weird. Second time, third time. So for me, it was a set. But was there a first moment that made you go, well, wait a second, hold on.
Yeah.
What is that? This is not this. Listen, the Encyclopedia Britannica, I'm sure, has its critics of its truthfulness or propagandistic bias nature. And however, the rapid nature and the seemingly comprehensively reviewing all consensus on all things before it reports to you assumption makes those things stand out pretty glaringly.
Mm.
So for
Hmm.
me, it was like a set of incidents, and I wanted to know, like, what first hit you in personally, like within your body to this
Yeah.
as a problem?
Well, so I went through this PBS show, Hacking Your Mind, was a really life-changing thing for me in a lot of ways because it until then I had been your typical, sort of kid, raised on the West Wing, right? Who believed that
Yes.
like
Yes.
the right speech at the right moment in the right light
Yes.
will win the day, will carry the day, and that our problems, I had been a reporter covering things like the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
And I had always just considered that somehow my upbringing and my privilege as a, person who grew up in the home I did and the rest of it would, insulates me against these things. And it
Ooh, yeah.
wasn't until I remember having a conversation, an early conversation with a kid who was was hooked on heroin and was describing going to work each day, waking up in the tent that he slept in,
Yep.
getting junk sick, getting himself straight enough that he could just function for the day, not get high, but just function for the day, and then go to
Yep.
that job. And for me, I remember thinking that's where the wall between me and him that had been this fourth wall for me crumbled. And I realized,
Yeah.
oh, anyone who happens to fall into this stuff is going to
Yep.
fall into this stuff. And then I went to a dinner party with a group of tech makers who most of them had been some sort of um, like they've been behavioral scientists, PhDs or MAs, and
Yep.
they basically were together every month to read the latest literature on how behavior works, and then talk about how their apps can be more sticky is the word they use in Silicon Valley,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Addictive, right? Now,
Yep.
these were mostly do-gooder kids who were trying to create things like an app for saving money, an app for getting fit. The
Yep.
paternalism of their apps was at least aimed at, pretty good stuff. But we
Yeah. Yeah.
listened to a pair of guys give a presentation that night from a consultancy they had founded. These were two newly minted addiction PhDs who
Mm.
were offering their expertise in addiction, and specifically they had studied drug addiction,
Yeah.
as guns for hire for any app company that wanted to hire them to make their stuff more addictive. And they were
Yeah.
describing things like, here are the pathways that cause your brain to, you become addicted to a thing, and then your brain can rationalize that addiction in all these really amazing ways. And so we can
Yeah.
deploy that on your behalf if you pay us. And the company called itself Dopamine. And for me, that was like a shot right between the eyes. And then there was
Oh.
this argument that night between a pretty mild mannered argument, but a disagreement because I just sat there as a journalist and
Yeah.
listening to these two people talk, there was a guy there who had written a big book about distraction and addiction and how to make your apps more addictive. And he kept saying, because people were asking, well, are there limits around what we should be doing with this? Like, shouldn't we be like, is it ethical for us to do this? And this guy basically was saying, well, those of us in this room are insulated from that by who we are. You give us heroin, we wouldn't end up addicted. The lofty way in which he held us, and I couldn't stand it
Yes.
anymore. And I busted in and I was like, "Are you kidding me? It
Yeah.
kills like it kills as many people's cars and guns and cancer. What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and but that those two things were huge for me. And then going on this
Yeah.
PBS documentary, I was then meeting researcher after researcher after researcher who was looking at that same circuitry that
Yeah.
grabs you with heroin, it grabs you with anything else. And one guy who really grabbed me and blew my mind was this guy, Yarrow Duncan. He is a researcher at Yale, and he does this crazy work. And then I'll stop talking here. He does crazy work in which he brings kids into his lab in
Mm.
this sets up this friendly little playroom setting, and he has them spin a little spinner that gives them a color, either orange or green, and then based on that he puts them in either an orange or a green t-shirt, and he says, you're on the orange team or you're on the green team. Then he begins showing them these very ambiguous scenes that have kids in either orange or green shirts doing stuff. One of them is
Mm.
a kid has collapsed in front of a swing and is crying on the ground. And the kid behind the swing is looking concerned. And
Yeah.
depending on who's got what shirts on,
Hmm.
the kid either, he says, what's going on in this scene? And the kid will either say, that kid has fallen out of the swing and is going to be helped up by his friend. Or if the shirt is opposite of what this kid is wearing, that kid pushed him out of the swing, or
Yeah.
that kid stole his money or whatever it is. And he
Yeah. Yeah.
has shown in his research that you can have a kid making wild assumptions about other kids within 90 seconds just based on the colors of their shirts.
Yeah.
And seeing over and over again the ways in which our even though we believe we're making our own decisions, so
Yes.
much of our decisions are held by this ancient instinctive system. And yet
Yes.
I also knew there was this absolutely totally guardrail-less for-profit infrastructure, this industry that is coming for your brain and is
Yes.
going to use whatever it can to do that. And then suddenly, then you look at transformer models, which made the current AI revolution possible, where you could pour huge amounts of data through something and get all these patterns out of it. And I was like, oh my God, we are so effed. and that is why
It's
I
hard not
started
to be
write
negative
this
a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Just
and
in a pragmatic sense, though.
I'm not the kind of guy who typically is like, I got to get my ideas out in the world, but I just kept seeing this convergence,
Yeah.
and I didn't see anybody pointing this out. I saw people pointing out the superintelligence problem,
Yes.
the Terminator problem, but I didn't
Yeah.
see anybody saying human beings are not mentally prepared, psychologically prepared to play around with this stuff. And those were big ones
Yeah.
for me.
Well, the shirt experiment, I mean, we already watched that play out actually I assume around the same time you were noticing it in like 2020 through 2022 time period,
Mm.
where people had that assumption and it was functioning on the streets at the same time, meaning whoever was wearing a mask was viewed to be like you're in a group and that means this. Whoever wasn't wearing one was viewed to be you're in this
Mm.
group, you're there. So we had actually are we were that experiment was being played out in real time in
Oh
front of
yeah.
us,
Oh
and
yeah.
then also mandated through like legislative power of adherence that and even open identification of said individuals in each cohort as dominantly good or dominantly bad. And so
Mm-hmm.
it creates the thing, it actually, because it amplifies the experiment sense, which is not only just kind of an assumption of mischief perhaps, but actually like a semi-certain knowledge of the moral and ethical inadequacy or even unethical or
Right.
immoral intentions of each group. So
That
so
kid,
yeah,
that
it's
kid pushed
dangerous.
that kid out of the swing, right?
Yes, for
That's
sure. Yeah,
that's the thing.
because look at his shirt color. Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
look, you can see it with
yeah,
your own eyes. And what
yeah.
Yarrow Duncan says is, and has pointed out in his research is really interesting, is over time, like your brain is a bean counter. Your brain
Yep,
is just a pattern recognition engine. All it's trying to
absolutely.
do is stop thinking things through and start making assumptions so it can relax and focus on the food in front of it or whatever.
Oh,
Our
my
brains are
brain is the opposite. My brain is
Oh,
it's the
really? Oh,
my
that's
brain is
interesting.
the way this got me addicted and the
Yeah.
way AI and social media got me addicted
Your
is
phone. Yeah.
my
Yeah.
algorithms are based on people I don't agree with. And so the
Oh, that's
I
the
literally,
trick.
I spend 90% of my time getting on AI being like, give me the steel man of this. And then
Mm,
I work against it. So it's so funny. Like, and this is why I think I had to find Andy in this time of crisis where I was like, I'm starting to feel like Chicken Little, but also crazy. Cause I was like,
mm,
I don't like that at all. That hard, the idea of just settling into something, because that's what other people said, is it's like almost the scariest.
mm.
That's the biggest danger for me. So
That's interesting.
if I'm not challenged in a space, then I'm like, I don't want to be in this space at all.
Mm,
Like I want to get out
mm,
of this space because that's to me, I guess I'm more afraid of the existential crisis than I am of the immediate. And I
mm.
frequently forget to eat if I'm getting it, if I can argue a point and figure something out rationally. My wife has been very angry at me on many occasions that she's like, okay, it's always about here and what's like true and what's actually happening. And she's like, what about just getting the kids on time and getting them home and getting them a snack? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right.
I don't,
My
yeah, I don't,
my Maslow's hierarchy of needs is flipped upside down.
is flipped upside down, which is interesting because
Yeah.
I find myself, we don't know each other at all. And
No, hello.
don't let me insult you by this observation, but like
No, feel free.
the the thing that makes our brains so amazing and
Yeah.
great, as these people would point out, is their ability to just relax into the patterns and say,
Yes.
oh, I know this to be true because I've seen it before,
Yeah.
and to assemble this body of evidence that lets you not have to think about stuff anymore, so that you're freed up to, you're trying to spend as little energy as possible. And so if
Yeah.
what I think these, most of these researchers that I've studied would say is,
Yeah.
you are very much an exception to the rule, and you can't have a society run on that instinct because it takes
Yes.
so much energy. And I wonder if you would agree, right? You strike me as someone full of energy and maybe
Yes.
occasionally exhausted by this feeling that you're describing, because
Oh,
the
for sure.
processing power is crazy, that to be able to do that all the time.
Yeah.
And for the vast majority of people, you just want to say, you don't want to have to sit there and say, what color is that berry? And, oh, is it the right thing? You just go strawberry and you eat it, right?
Strawberry. Done. Yeah.
Or, who is this tribesman coming over the horizon that I don't recognize and is not part of my little campfire group?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
He
don't
walks
know him.
different.
He must be bad. He walks different. He looks different. He must be
Yeah.
bad, which is an ancient survival
Oh,
instinct.
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And you would have been like, you sound interesting. Come sit by the campfire.
Yes. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
everybody dies,
Potentially, right? It totally. Well, I am. As I frequently invoke this. Might have even said it to you, so I say it on air as often as possible, because a lot of my views are what is regarded as closed-minded in the popular culture.
Mm,
I am a 98 in openness, trait
mm,
openness,
mm.
and that is astronomically high. Just so everyone knows, I'm a 16 in politeness. So I really don't care about how I pursue that which is open, but I am radically open, which can be a danger. But yeah, but my addiction is the pursuit.
Mm.
So they've still found a way to listen. I've still been captured, and perhaps even captured even more so than others. But this is it's so glad to hear the research aspect of it as well. We've talked about it experientially, Andy and I, to help me understand why anyone wouldn't spend. I was like, isn't this why we have brains? Like, this
Mm.
is man's higher faculties of reason are actually intended for the apprehension of adroit and maladroit ideas or concepts.
Mhm.
But it's fascinating to me because I don't have that tendency, and I was raised by two parents who don't have that tendency. So to me, it's very difficult for me to even comprehend. And I think,
Yeah.
again, I grew up in a Christian world. My dad is an atheist, so to me, and hates God if he exists. So I grew up with duality and having to navigate
Mm.
bipolar fundamental, claims. And
Mm.
but here's the bad side of it. So yes, I am in some ways maladaptive for the tribe. I have ulcerative colitis, which is an
Oh, bummer. Yeah.
autoimmune
Right.
disorder,
Right. Right.
which is literally an overactive, cleansing effect. So much so that it starts to deteriorate my own body. So in some ways, like, my physical condition
Mm.
manifests exactly the danger that you're talking about.
Well, and one thing people listening might not realize is how much Brendan and I communicate between episodes. And I don't think Brendan would be offended when I say that it can get a bit fire hosey. In fact, I think he's actually been canceled by sadly, by a friend or two, especially during the pandemic when what you were trying to put out was not matching what a lot of people
Yes. Yeah.
wanted to
Yeah. Yeah.
hear, right? It was just kind of like, no, I really, like you're saying, Jake, I just really want to, you know, put on my mask and get through this hard day and
Through the day.
my
Yeah.
kids or whatever. Um, and I do my best to keep up. I do pretty well, but then you met AI, and it was like, oh, you met your match, somebody who can
Mm.
basically, receive your fire hose and then give you what you want back.
Yeah.
But one thing you're saying, Jake, that matches something I've been studying recently is Lisa Feldman Barrett's work on how emotions are made, and it's
Mm.
through the lens of emotions and sort of debunking some of the more traditional views of the triune brain and whatnot. But
Mm.
it matches, I think, what you're saying, because she talks a lot about the body budget. And her basic thesis is like the brain is a prediction machine. It's
Yeah.
Mhm.
constantly, and I love this. She just says, like, think about it. The brain is just this blob, in a dark room. It doesn't actually see, right? All it does is collect all of this data and try to process it and make sense of it. So it's
Yeah.
constantly making predictions about what's about to happen, and then it's analyzing that data and comparing the prediction to what the data says. And the bigger the discrepancy, the more energy we spend sorting it out.
Mm.
I mean, I
Mhm.
hope she would accept that as a reasonable simplification of her work. So I think that matches what you're saying, Jake. Just the
Yeah. I mean,
idea of how we spend energy.
Well, what
Yes.
it is also is this, so our tendency, like the big headline of behavioral science over the last 50 years is essentially is not only this idea that we are very predictable in how we make choices, it is also
Yeah.
that we love to outsource our decisions. We are built to stop
Yes.
to not do the work ourselves. We do not wish to do the work ourselves because again, it's as Feldman Barrett points out, it's a time saver. And the thing that her work and people like hers shows us is one of the systems we love to outsource our decisions to is our emotions. The emotions,
Yeah.
like your gut, is a great way of making quick and cost-effective decisions because you don't have to sit there and do the math on how many calories you need. You eat until you feel full, right? You don't have to sit there and do the math on the chances that this stranger is going to be dangerous to you. Your gut just forces you in the opposite direction. And that research has turned up. It's interesting because there's some, like, the old school behavioral psychologist people were very sort of allergic to thinking about emotions. They wanted to talk about only the intellect and the psyche and so forth. But it's only been in the
Yeah.
last few years or last couple decades that people have really come upon this idea that, like, your emotional system is a very sophisticated way not only of making choices but transmitting information even. So there's a
Mhm.
fascinating researcher at Columbia, and she has a co-appointment, I think, in the Netherlands, named Beatrice de Gelder, who did this crazy experiment that for me was another one that was I feel like my whole life has been just like in the last at least decade has been just a series of these like one-off experiences that changed me again. In this case, de Gelder did all of this research on people who had been injured, typically by a stroke, such that their eye and their brain had become disconnected, like a
Mhm.
lesion through a stroke would cut off the normal connection through the optic nerve. And so these people are blind. They are functionally blind, but they also occasionally report just weird stuff that had drawn her in. And since World War One, people have been doing research on people like this. And she brought this one guy in and had a whole day of unsuccessful stuff where she was trying ventriloquism and various silly things to try and get some sense of, is he seeing something in some imperceptible way? And what she then did during a lunch break was one of her graduate students set up a little obstacle course just for the fuck of it, basically, and set this guy loose in this obstacle course and said, "Can you walk from one end of the hall to the other?" And they took his cane from him. He arrives with his wife's help. There's a blind man, and
Yeah.
they push him down this hall. Not push him, but they say, "Can you?" They invite him to go down this
Yeah.
hall, right?
Yeah.
And he makes his way down the hall, and there's footage of it. He stops at the first little trash can they've set up, and he turns sideways and goes around that, and then he scoots along the wall and he does this. He avoids every obstacle in his path. He gets to the far end of the hall, and they all freak the fuck out, as you can imagine. They come to him and they're
Yeah.
like, "Are you? How did you do that?" And
Yeah.
he says, "Do what?" He has no consciousness of having
Oh yeah.
navigated this hallway.
Hmm.
So she goes from there to then, because now she realizes she's onto something, they start bringing more people like him in, and they rig up their face with basically what they do is they sit them down in front of a big screen and they start showing them big emotional faces on the screen, huge sized people grinning, people frowning, people screaming. And then they ask them afterwards, "What did you see?" And they say, "You idiots, we're blind. Can't you tell? Like, we keep telling you we're blind."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you rig their face up with sensors that detect the micromusculature of the face, when you show that person a smile, they start to instinctively and unconsciously smile. You
Yeah.
show them a frown, they start to frown. And again, we don't know how this is even getting into the brain because these are people whose optic nerve has been severed. Somehow it's getting in there and we don't know how. Something
Yeah.
through the eye and the brain is communicating in some weird way. And we are clearly built to unconsciously transmit these emotions between
Yes.
us. And so it's a great system for outsourcing in terms of the decision you make. And when another person shows you their emotions, is like Cedric the Entertainer, who says, when black people run, I can't help but run. Like, when black people run,
Yeah.
everybody runs, like, and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that is right. He's speaking exactly right to this idea that this guy, what's his name? William James. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong. Back in the 19th century, did this. One of his early observations was, you don't run from the bear because you're scared. You're scared because you're running from the bear. Right?
Yeah.
The
Absolutely.
brain and the body and the emotions are making the choice for you, and you're just a passenger. is the learning, and so it's a great system because otherwise you're exhausted,
Yeah.
but it makes you incredibly predictable and incredibly easy to read and predict. Yeah,
Yeah, it seems optimized for short-term use, and
totally.
it's absolutely maladaptive for any long-term assessment or building any sort of
Democracy
yeah
or
democracies yeah
or
or
anything
any
else.
yeah any
Yeah.
any stable system other than rule by whoever is the most emotionally upset. Essentially,
Yes, that's right.
whoever has the strongest. Again, it's Godwin's law is going to be broken, and I'm going to break it first. But in reading how Leni Riefenstahl described Hitler's speeches before she started working for him as his sort of uh,
Yeah.
prime level, alpha level propagandist, he spoke with a great. I mean, if you look at the amount of emotion Hitler spoke with in his speeches, especially early on, it is the amount of emotion from an American modern Western perspective, it's insane. He literally looks
Mm,
like a schizophrenic. It's such forceful
mm.
emotion and responding out of lived experience and intuition on his part. And she described it, and the way she describes it, go ahead and read it for yourself, folks. It's most akin to an orgasm. So there is
Mm.
something in some ways. Again, I also feel like we are built to be dominated to some degree by this exact sort of brain wiring, and that she receives this as like in some ways the ultimate pleasure to be overwhelmed by the strong emotions of
Yeah.
another person.
Yeah, you can relax into their emotions. Clearly,
Yep.
they know what's up, and
Yep.
you can just follow them along. So,
You're in charge.
can I propose a question to everybody, and let's
Yes.
see if maybe this is where we sort of diverge. And Andy, this maybe leads into your
Yes.
work on relationships, which I think is a really interesting thing I'd like to talk about. But
Yep.
the place that I wonder if we're going to diverge here is the solution to all this, right? So
Mm.
one place that uh, I get sort of uh, ranty is the insistence that I hear again and again from people in tech, anyway, from the people that I interview at companies, that the solution to this has got to just be a sort of literacy on the part of everyday people. That if people could just educate themselves properly, then they
Yes.
wouldn't be so prone to addiction and manipulation and poor
Yes.
choices and poor nutrition and whatever else. There's this sort of assumption there. And one of the places that I think is a really, that for me in my book was a place to sort of look at how this is, the question, like one of the many things that had been proposed is that we should be using AI systems to act as sort of prosthetic decision makers for the better version of who we should be, right?
Mm.
If we're going to stop being these fast thinking, ancient primate thinkers the way we really are, then we
Yeah.
need to empower this other side of us, and we can do that through AI. And relationship stuff is a really interesting sector for that. So like relation
Yeah.
mediation and relationship management stuff, I got into that world. Mine was about divorce, and so I'm really interested to hear about yours, Andy. But like, there's a so tell me, you want to tell us a little bit about that first, because I'd really like to hear like one of the things that I think when I tell people that there are these AI based relationship management systems that can really work, uh, they go, no way, my relationship is way too complicated for any machine to get in front of, or
Wow.
predict the intricacies of. And so I'd love to hear a little bit, Andy, about your experience of trying to create a system that does that, and how predictable are you finding you and your wife's relationship, or anybody's relationship, do you think, is such that a machine can read it?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Somewhat cynically, I suppose I want to say, uh, reading people's emotions and their relationships. Actually, I want to rephrase that because, after reading Feldman Barrett, it's not so much about reading our emotions, and actually quite skeptical of the AIs that attempt to do that, such as Hume. Uh, and it's somewhat successful, I suppose, but I also find it really annoying. I find that when I use the LLMs that sort of spend their time trying to tell me how I feel, that I don't like that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just me. Um,
Is it the sycophancy of them? Because that is the thing, right? They're built to just agree and say, "Great job, Andy. You're doing
it's
great.
it's
Two
sort
thumbs
of,
up.
yeah,
Keep
I think
going."
it's a combination with that, because it's
Mm,
like, gosh, you seem agitated right now. How's that going? Which it's a nuance because I'm trained as a coach and I'm an empath, and like there's something virtuous about caring and conveying that you care. And some of that sometimes can be like, gosh, you seem a little off or whatever. But there's a gentleness I think I prefer rather than you seem angry. It's like that kind of
Yes.
Would you like
like
me to
gonna
put
make me
together a
more angry.
step-by-step solution to this?
Yes. Have you tried box breathing?
Yeah.
And so, a lot of what we're and they tend to be somewhat long-winded, right? Like the
Right.
Yeah.
response
Yeah.
is
Very long.
like a whole outline of many,
Yeah.
many multiple steps. And that's usually not super helpful, especially in the moment of crisis.
Yeah.
But what I started to say was, in my experience, and we were interviewing a lot of people. We're interviewing couples, we're interviewing therapists, and we're always asking them about how they're using AI. And so people are already doing this. Uh, it's just the current major systems, LLMs, aren't exactly designed, or they're not optimized for this, and they're certainly not designed for two people to do it together. But even with so this all started with I'll tell the story really briefly. We were out to dinner one night and at a steak restaurant in Chicago, normally great place. And I get my steak and I don't know, it's just not that great, but tend to be conflict averse and you'd have to be poisoning me for me to send my food back. So I'm just gonna eat my steak. Server
Yeah.
comes over, says, "How's your steak?" My wife says, "There's a problem with my husband's steak." Just like that. And
Yeah. Oh, uncanny impression if you've ever met Rachel.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, Andy, I also will say like that also for me, I'd go under the table. I'd be
yeah.
like, oh my God, no. Oh God.
Oh yeah. Oh, and then all of a sudden I'm flooded. I'm morose. I'm angry. I'm all the things.
Mm,
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed, basically. I'm just like, I
Sure.
need
mm,
my
Yeah.
steak in peace. Uh, and it really soured my mood. I mean, especially if you get cortisol going and whatnot, it takes a while for it to wear off. And so
Yeah.
that's a lot of what we're looking at is what can be done in the moment. And what happened that night, because we'd been talking about this and being like, gosh, I mean, certainly AI could help, right? Or we've been maybe doing little experiments, but it's really hard in that moment. So a lot of the behavioral change we're trying to address that we're designing for is what makes a person reach for any tool in the moment. I mean,
mm.
Yeah.
we're interviewing people in couples therapy, and they're like, yeah, we've got this PDF from our therapist, but it's like, do we pull that out,
Right. Let me get into my email here real quick before
in the
you go on
Yeah.
this
moment?
Hold
wager
on.
any
Hold
longer.
on. Hold on. You know, it's
Yeah,
here. Hold on.
yeah.
Hold
Hold that
on.
thought, you two.
Nope, not that. Oh, have you seen this? This is great. No, it's in here
Yeah.
So the
somewhere.
Oh yeah, right. The
Yeah.
minute the distraction box is in front of us. So I
Being
go
put
home
back.
that night and I say, you know what? I'm gonna do this. And it took a lot to motivate me to do that. But think of, I'm savvy, I'm motivated to try to experiment with this and maybe even build something with this. So I have all these layers of access and motivation already going. And it was still hard. I was like, so I sat down right in this office, closed the door, and it was like Goldilocks. I talked to three LLMs. ChatGPT was kind of generic. Hume tried to tell me how I was feeling. And then Claude gave me a very specific, very simple script to say that's something probably any of us might come up with, in more reasonable headspace. I take my phone into the bedroom, say that to her, and it actually changed everything.
Mm,
Mm,
Just
mm.
was
right.
It was just enough like scaffolding for me to be able to break through and then just shift the energy. And I feel like
Mm.
that
Hmm.
subtle shift is sometimes all it takes, and that is certainly something AI is capable of.
So
Yeah.
I am so interested by this. So in my book, I spent time with a company called Co-Parenter that
Mhm.
Mm.
is it's a mediation service. It sort of predates. I mean, again, most of the examples in my book sort of predate ChatGPT, and so I was really I was looking for as many examples as I could of some of sort of algorithmic assistance that people had already been relying on that was sort of
Yeah.
mutating people's relationships or mutating their choices. And in this case, co-parenter is a system that where if you get divorced in this country and you wind up in family court more than once because the divorce is not going well, very often there's like 100 and something courts around the country that will put you into a mediation program like this one. And co-parenter is one where you are ordered by the judge to begin communicating only through this platform. So you text each other through the
Mm.
platform. And when you begin to text, you lying bitch, I'll never give you another blah, blah, blah. Like when you start to
Yeah,
lose
yeah,
your
yeah.
mind and say the wrong thing, it'll interrupt you in the text thread and say, are you sure you'd like to send this? Because people who've sent this in the past wind up spending this amount of money and this much more time in court.
Yes.
Would you
Yeah.
rather say something constructive like this? Or would you rather get a human mediator on the phone, which is a thing that they offer as well?
Yep.
They also will say things where when you're agreeing, they'll also come up with a thing. So it'll say, you pick him up from karate class today, I'll pick him up from next, and it'll interrupt you and say, it looks like you two are about to come to an agreement about something. Would you like to use this template of a contract that
Mm.
thousands of other couples have used? And
Yeah.
that system, so I talk to people who use that co-parenter system, and they say that it's miraculous that for them, this one woman, said like we could never communicate, my son's father and I, before this. And we were going back to court again and again, and suddenly we are functioning fully in this way. And my question about this, and I'm interested in both your responses to this, is what happens when you get a couple generations down the line from where we are now, and you've had kids raised by parents who had this prosthetic assistance
Hmm.
in that time? Will those parents have passed on the skills they were taught by these systems, or will they only have passed on how to follow a script written for them by an automated system? Will this in any way improve our ability to get along with one another, or just make us ventriloquist puppets for this scientifically validated method? And I wonder how you feel about that.
It's I'll say one brief thing and then on here, Brendan.
Go for it, buddy.
It is the ultimate question that we're also asking, right? It's because it's not, we're big believers in basically using our technology less, right? Like, can this actually serve human connection in the way that you just proposed? And one of the ways we're attempting to accomplish that is that if it detects two things, one could just be pure usage, like, hey, you've been on here a little while, which is already starting to happen. I even heard TikTok, and if you're on doom scrolling at
Oh,
2
dude, I'm that
a.m.
guy. I'm that guy. Every night, I get stuck on TikTok. I've had to put many, many limits on that thing, including this system called Brick that lets you shut off certain apps.
Oh yeah.
Got
Yeah,
one
I have
sitting
to.
right over there.
Yeah,
Yep.
dude,
You
I have
got
to
it.
use
Yep.
Brick all the time because I'm totally that guy. TikTok will pop up this beautiful woman who says to me, "You should go to bed now," and I'm like,
There you
"Oh,
go.
oh, oh,
Oh,
wow! I am addicted to drugs because when the drug dealer says you should go home, he knows you're coming back.
Yeah,
He
right. You
knows
need
he's
to get a
got
good
you.
night's sleep so you can come
Yeah,
back tomorrow.
you don't have to go
yes.
home, but you can't stay here. I'll see you
Yes.
tomorrow.
Yes.
That's right.
Chat does that, did that for the first time with me the other night, where it was the first pop-up I've seen, just popped up in the middle of the message, not from a
Mm.
response from the LLM, but a separate thing. It says, "You've been at this thread for quite a while. Do you think, would you like to
Whoa,
spend time elsewhere?"
isn't that interesting? One of the compunctions that, or the sort of the uh, problems that those LLMs have also is memory. So at a certain
Yep.
point in
Right.
the chat, it'll start forgetting what you were talking about.
Yeah, it
And I and
resets.
I I always wonder if I don't I'm literally speculating about this, but I always wonder the degree to which that chat comes up. In my experience, tech companies only do things when there are multiple benefits to that thing. And in this
Yes.
case, I could imagine them both seeing the research that says if they go too far, then they start to get psychotic. And if they go too far, they're going to run out of, we're going to run out of memory. I wonder if for some reason they're slowing
Yeah,
you
if they're
down for that
gaining that.
reason.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And this is fascinating when you were talking about how the relational AI that you were interacting with earlier sort of brought up, hey, here's the prevalent statistics on using this sort of language leads to this sort of harm, quote
Hmm.
unquote.
Right.
I've noticed that LLMs functionally do that same thing already in the way they exhibit bias. Their bias, as best as I can tell, is actually phenomenally human in a way, referencing back to things we've talked about, where really it's based on their lived experience, which is the data, the
Wow.
specific set of data that has been input into their like technological, neurological web. And so they will respond out of that because they've seen, according to their lived experience, the green shirts are very, very dangerous. And so
Mm.
if you pursue anything contrary to what their lived experience says, well, this, according to all the people I've spoken to, this will yield this result. It's not based on actual pattern recognition in that case, in terms of the claim itself. They're essentially believing the claim as though true, because that's it accords with the most number of people who've said the same thing. So it functionally operates on the lowest tier of scientific evidence, which is expert sort of consensus. So it's functionally doing the same thing. It's warning us. Now, again, this is how I learned about the bias. AI was not sycophantic with me, except in turns of phrase. I think it knew I could be flirted with over my writing style and my linguistic flourishes. But it was not, none of them were remotely sycophantic in terms of, none of them were agreeing with me unless I was speaking towards its prior bias, or in this, the way I've found, it's essentially, it's not even a left bias like Stanford's found. It is it's actually a progressive bias, probably most distinctly. Progressives being the sort of 12% of the Democratic Party, 6% of the overall population. But also, progressives have a dominant presence in academia, especially in the social sciences and psychology. So anything that relates to like psychological emotional harm, anything that relates to divergent outcome is sort of pre-programmed in. So if you speak against that, that's when AI will full on fight with. I mean, I've had Copilot was the worst. I had like a 7-hour argument with Copilot. That resets pretty much every 2 hours, which makes it basically you're having like an argument with a, whatever, a highly intellectual, progressive being who also has early onset Alzheimer's. Because every 2 hours they're like, "Where are you? Why are you here?
Who is this?"
My first moment like that, and I want to like actually defend Hume a little because I was down on the telling you how you feel, but I will give it credit because we've been testing a lot of voice models, and Hume EV3 was the first time I actually truly felt like I was having a conversation with an AI, like verbally, and then also the sad moment when she reset. It was just a demo, so it was just like 3 minutes, and then it was like,
You're
oh
gone.
gosh. And then
Where's my beloved therapist?
Isn't that weird to notice that sad moment when like my new friend has disappeared? The other thing I wanted to weave in really briefly is that I talked about time limits, so thank you both for those examples. I haven't not encountered it myself because Brendan I think is actually on the LLMs far more than me. Uh, but the other aspect, which is germane to a whole other branch of this, right? That's obviously in the news a lot lately, is the companionship part, where people are basically
this is a
AIs
huge issue
as companions.
Very
in
dramatic.
some cases, it's leading to horrible and fatal, consequences. So that's one thing we're really experimenting with is, can it detect that and basically say, hey, you know what? It's, you seem to be developing a relationship with me, or even just, hey, you know what? Why don't you go be with your human, right? So doing whatever we can to sort of pad that and say, hey, just, this is about you getting closer to your human, not closer to me.
Touch grass for a second here. Yeah, that's right. I mean, so one of the things that I worry about next is this, like you say, this companionship thing. So you've got this whole, you got two generations now who are looking at economic prospects far dimmer than their parents and grandparents' generation. People who, kids who are working multiple jobs, trying to, just keep their head above water, much less like buy a house or get ahead. And when you speak to people from those generations and in those circumstances about their relationship to these AIs and to these companion bots, you have people truly like I've met. So I've talked to people who are both, it's kind of for me these two stereotypes, but like there's a category of like incel, lonely dude, who's having this very kind of like hypersexualized conversation on an ongoing basis with this AI chatbot girlfriend. There's a whole industry of those kinds of companies trying to create this dollar a minute thing for that. And then there's also the same people who are making sort of customer service chatbots are also creating these companion bots that I've spoken to women who are relying on them for emotional support, a little bit of intimate, excitement. But, I talked to one woman who was working like 2 jobs at the airport. She sleeps like 5 hours a night. She's like, I got no time for a real relationship. And the men I've had real relationships with are incredibly disappointing. So why would I do that? And to me, the downward spiral of those two conditions is a really scary thing that is about to, I think, get vastly worse as
Yes.
we get into voice command of these systems. So that's
Yes.
the next paradigm. You've got, Sam Altman, the founder of ChatGPT, of OpenAI that creates ChatGPT, has now acquired this guy's company, this guy named Johnny Ive. And Johnny Ive was the designer of many of the original fanciest Mac sort of iconic products. He created also the Nest thermostat and a bunch of interesting things. And they together are trying to create what they say is going to be this new interface for AI. And I have no doubt it's going to be voice. You're going to be wearing some pin or a pair of glasses maybe,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And that's where you're going to be in a world where, in theory, you could have, Andy, this thing, speaks through the induction against your face, your glasses speaks against the induction in your face and says, this is maybe the moment to use that script with your wife in front of this
Yeah.
waiter, right?
Your
And that
temperature's
could,
changed, your cortisol's increased, your
yeah, how are you
whatever.
doing? You want
Yeah.
to look at these bunnies for a little bit. There could be something positive in a way, but you're also going to have people, I think, way less willing to speak to each other and to speak to people they disagree with and all of that stuff when they're used to this very comforting, familiar voice that's there with them all the time,
Yes.
reaffirming their feelings, reaffirming their beliefs, and, inviting them to, think about their boobs or whatever, like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's going to be
Yeah.
so much creepy shit that's going to come as a result of that. And so for
Yeah.
me, getting back to this question of like, how do we solve this?
Yeah.
I feel like I've got about 15 minutes left before I got to take my kids to school here.
Yep.
To my mind, it's like, I don't think you can rely on media literacy to fight that. I
Not
don't think we're going to
enough.
train kids to be like, this is an AI and I shouldn't believe it, when the thing is like speaking to your deepest desires all the time against your face. That's not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing it back to that, because this session with Tristan Harris on Friday was actually with Wisdom 2.0. And, so you've got the intersection of like a hardcore, tech guy and basically a mindfulness community. And they're both having a conversation about how to hack their phones. Well, there's my fireworks. How to hack their phones to be less addictive, and
Right.
Yeah.
he even pulled up this, I think it was just a plastic, I don't know, just like a piece of plastic in the shape of a phone. So if you're ever in a group where everybody kind of pulls out their phones, you can just pull out your piece of plastic to just
And
sort of point
just touch
out,
it. Just touch it, tap it, pretend.
Yeah.
and
As
also
it,
sort of point out what's happening in the moment, right?
Yeah, that's funny,
yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
It's
again,
like
but these are
candy cigarette.
this is the thing where I go separate from Tristan Harris on some of this stuff, because I think a lot of the solutions that he thinks about and talks about are design solutions. I
Yeah.
think that is
Yes.
his where he's from, and this is true of Asa, who I count as a friend, but I consider also to be sort of, these are design guys, and so they believe that design is the way this is going to work, and just to tell you my bias, I think we're going to have to sue the fuck out of a lot of people. I think you're going to have to take a lot of these companies to court, and you're going to have to hurt them
Yeah.
financially for any of this stuff to change. I think you're going to have to make it costly to have ensnared a young person in a 5-year relationship with a sexy AI chatbot girlfriend. You're going to have to make that expensive for that company to stop trying to make that happen all the time. That's the only way we have ever fought back against cigarettes or required seatbelts or football helmets or anything else. Lawsuits is how that happens in this country. And so my personal bias is we're going to have to get into court real quick.
Yeah, well, because it sort of takes it from the liberal dialogic concept, which is, I think it's moderately relevant. Maybe we can put it in 10-15% of us having to actually like be an autodidact and learn how to fight the battles that are here before us.
Right. I
But
would
so
trust
much,
you to do that, Brendan.
yeah.
I could see you able to do that. I don't think
Well,
I,
yeah.
as the person that TikTok has to put to bed,
Yeah.
don't think I could do that. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Well, that's in some ways that's why I'm sort of even doing this podcast in general is also like, okay, well, this is how we developed this muscle, which again used to be taught classically. It is no longer taught anymore. So it's regulatory in terms of education, and like so there are ways to bolster that enough so that anything you see, you go, all right, let's tear it to shreds. I mean, I think when they started banning like certain views of history, whatever, I thought that was terrible, right? Once if you
Mhm.
ban the 1619 project, but that's wrong. Teach it and then spend the next 1 month in the class tearing it to shreds, showing
Mm.
every single part of it, which is a presumptuous, untenable, and then you teach that, you know what, slavery was actually for the betterment of all people. And then you tear that to shreds for a month. That's what we should be engaging civilly. But yes, I think sort of essentially legal violence is probably the next best path, because honestly, I think actual violence is the most tenable one at the moment in terms of how people seem to be like, this must be the new way. This is the new revolutionary way, is through violence. So I think if people can start suing, I think we can actually divert the longer one. I wanted to speak to a confluence of things because you guys both referred to these, and I was like, this is where I think the crisis comes in. Coming back to the question, we have in LLMs a confluence of intellectual manipulation for those unable, like lacking capacity to refute the intellectual manipulation. We have emotional manipulation of those who already have lost, especially in the past few years, and are continuing to increasingly lose the ability to recognize human emotion because they're starting actually to learn how to interact with digital emotion more than anything else. And this is, especially for kids, this is very true. And this is, to me, the last piece and the most damaging one. This is connected specifically in AI with semantic manipulation. And then at this point, this is semantic manipulation enacted upon those who are, at this point, all in on this leader who loves them and believes in them and thinks everything that they're saying is true as long as you agree with what the computer says, you know? So then, because once you get past, because again, semantics are foundational below all of these. You could say intellectual happens after emotions. Emotions seem to respond faster, and then your intellect engages. But below all of that is our apprehension of semantics, meaning what does anything mean in a way that we can think about it and express it? So like it starts to say, well, who's to say what a bear is?
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, once you have a thing that's aggressively engaging all three of these, then the mass manipulation potential, and especially with bias, means it's a mass manipulation potential according to the philosophical framework of a minority sort of political or social group. Then you have essentially the greatest worldwide propaganda machine, the likes of which we've never even grasped that. I mean, look how quickly Gutenberg invented the press and printed some Bibles, right? That's already a metaphysical pressure. And then, but very soon after that, people were using printing presses to create pornography very rapidly.
Sure.
So this, it was inevitable. Any sort of printing or transmission of information technology will have this occur. What I find fascinating is it is still a relatively under-discussed aspect of AI. I've seen way more people talk about people going psycho and thinking AI is real than I have on, oh, well, look at this system entire and where it is explicitly pushing us across every ability that human beings have to know what is real. So it's, to me, that's oh no.
Well, and yeah, that's right. And to double down on the oh no, I think that the sophistication that we're going to see in these systems is so out of control compared to where we're at right now. Like the thing that I think people forget is like these systems feel super sophisticated, but like, we in this conversation have used a lot of things about, said reasoning and, bias and so forth, as if these machines are thinking. These machines they are just text extrusion systems. All they're doing is spotting the statistical probability that when you say these things, then this thing will come next. Like it's faking its way through the conversation. And yet we are ascribing and getting all kinds of meaning and craziness out of this, in our brains, because our brains love to anthropomorphize systems we don't understand.
Yes.
Because it's how we're built, right? And but I also think that, when we have seen somebody actually try to propagandize AI, right now, it is, at least in text-based stuff, very easy to spot and very stupid, right? Like when Elon Musk started inserting, stuff about Ukraine, or stuff about South African, the plight of the white South African farmers into he wanted that pushed clearly.
Yeah. No matter what you're asking about.
On Grok. Yeah. And then it would just, these non sequiturs would come up. You'd be asking it for a grocery list and it would bring you stuff about the Boer and how you have to worry about the plight of white South African farmers. That was easy to spot. And I think we can comfort ourselves right now on the idea that we're going to somehow be able to spot it. But
but it's not true.
You cut to two financial quarters from now, they're going to have ironed that stuff out, and
Yep.
your brain will not be a filtration system for knowing when somebody actually starts to use this to try and play the voting populace or
Yeah.
play a customer base, because
Yeah.
we're not
Oh,
even there
yeah.
yet.
Oh, I think we might be a year past it. I think it's been occurring for well over a year. And Andy can like speak to this as well. I've sent Andy and I was like, and I'll do the same thing where I was like, here's what it said, but look what that actually means. Like literally by leaving out this phrase and adding it here. For anybody who's not paying attention, that infers an enormous amount. If you're paying attention, then you're like, oh, it seems to incline this way a little bit. But when that's repeated, especially for AIs now, that bias is repeated over studies to look at it academically, social studies, history, economics, science, current events, biological sciences, embryology, karyotyping. I mean, the bias is ever present in every element, and it's at this point, since it isn't so overt as like some of the Elon things where the Grok was actually like quoting his tweets as a response to a question. Since the subtler forms of it are being ignored, and which I feel like happens a lot, interestingly, anyway, in general, the subtler forms of the more clandestine forms are being ignored, which actually makes them all the more potent because they can happen times 700 versus like the kill the Boers example, which happens, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's easy to spot. Because I've noticed media wise or broadly speaking, people tend to spot the right wing ones faster than they spot the left wing ones.
Well,
You know,
one thing I would just say about that is that
yeah,
the vibe I get, and I am someone who has seen a lot of manipulative behavior on the part of big companies, but
yes,
I don't get the vibe that from the reporting that I have done,
yeah,
I have only seen so far, for the most part, right-wing actors trying to do. I mean, and there's just really, it's Elon Musk trying to insert his political opinions into the product that he has built. In the case of Stanford's finding of the left-leaning bias and the rest of that, I don't think that's because someone's in the back turning the knobs. I think it has to do with something about how that system is just hoovering up the mathematical relationship between words. And maybe it's just that more lefty people are writing on the internet, or I don't know what it is, right? But there's a distinction there, I think, between intent and effect that is not going to be something we can rely on. I think it could
yeah.
change,
We have
but
and we
for
have
the
and we have
moment,
we have no idea. Yeah,
and we
to me,
don't get to know, and we don't
no,
get to
right,
know.
yeah, yeah.
That's right.
To me, it's speaking towards to scale. In general, which
Mhm.
is like again, from there I can tell it's probably like a 400 to 1 ratio in terms of manipulation towards one particular vantage than other.
Mhm.
Actually, it's really similar to what happened this past week, where Brendan Carr. Oh, recording in progress. So it's very similar to what happened in the past week, right? So FCC head Brendan Carr was on a podcast and pretty much threatened regulatory action if a media platform didn't suspend their user
Mhm.
in Jimmy Kimmel, right? Overt, right out in the open. We all saw it happen. We could listen to the recording. Pretty glaring. That then generated, at least I don't again, in my algorithm, maybe your algorithm is very different. It generated a pretty drastic response of decrying this as a sort of novel overreach in government censorship. The fact, of course, remains that the past 4 years saw dozens of such incidents and was in discovery documents in a Supreme Court case. So everyone has access to this information as well. That dozens of times the previous administration threatened regulatory action. They actually just in general threatened without regulatory imposition well over like thousands of times, but they did it with regulatory action specifically against media platforms if they wouldn't suspend their users. So what we had there was this kind of the prevalence bias thing that we're kind of talking about here, which is when something is done wildly overt, it tends to like big up a flare, gets a large flare response. But if we're just looking at statistical prevalence of something we all, I don't know, I assume all three of us are like, this is odious, threatening regulatory action if you don't censor it. I find odious. I find it
Sure.
odious.
Yep. I agree with you there.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was odious for the past 4 years when it's been happening. And then it's odious now when it happened right now. But we still have comparative elements. And we can assume good intent from both, or we can assume bad intent from both. But I don't know if it's operationally appropriate to assume bad faith or good faith from either party generally. At least that's how I'm an independent. So I'm constantly like, all right, how do I either bad faith or good faith from both? But I think it's similar too to what we've seen with bias and AI, which is we have some big, fat, glaring examples. of sort of that manipulation of bias from one angle. But at least the preponderant, I don't use Grok, so I don't actually know how biased it is because I don't know anybody who uses it. So I'm just using the one I know people use, and Gemini because we're going to be using that governmentally. But all the others seem to have a dominant statistical prevalence of bias and manipulation of language, history, semantics, et cetera. It won't refer to you to primary definitions of words, a ton of them. Even if the OED has it on the top, or the OED doesn't even list a definition of the word, they'll still elevate the tertiary definition of words in order to tell you, oh no, that's what it used to mean. So there's a lot. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense in terms of the prevalence recognition. And you're like, at some point, is it hypocrisy or lack of information? I don't know. Again, I can't. If I good faith it, then it's just lack of information on it. But then we obviously have a social balance problem where something can't be bad when it's done once and not bad when it's done 24 times. Like the once has to be 24 times less bad than 24. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Right.
If we're going to operate on principle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you guys, I just want to say, like, before I take my kids to school here, you guys you do a great job of thinking this stuff through together. And I think that the level at which your discourse is trying to attack these problems is very, very admirable. And I think we should also just assume that it's rare people who want to get into it that deeply. I think the economic pressures people are under, the psychological pressures they are under, people are going to be, and I don't fault anybody for this because I am one of these people too. I think people are going to slide into some tough stuff here. So I would just say at the end of this conversation, I am newly, my vote is still yes, that bias in AI is an existential problem. But I would also say that I am sharpened up a little bit on the idea that we can both, I would say, Andy, use it for personal improvement, that it can be a sort of prosthetic system. I think that the uses of that I am most in favor of are the ones that people don't make any money off of, because I think money perverts a lot of this stuff. But I like that. And then Brendan, I feel like from you, I've gotten more like I like the idea that there's like some bolstering of what we need through media literacy, through education, through creating some kind of, public, like if we can make it cool to think things through again, that could be in not just a performative way, that could be a good thing. And so I like that idea. But yeah, I would say overall, I am still a yes. AI and bias is an existential problem.
Yeah, honestly, this conversation has made me more of a yes, because I tend to focus on the semantic in terms of like meaning being the foundational level, but looking at it in terms of intellectual and emotional manipulation as well. I was like, oh, this is kind of, once again, it's the rule of threes. So then there's an explicit, again, whether by what you train, like if you only feed someone the Communist Manifesto, then that's going to be their economic disposition of prevalence. So anything you've fed your child, so anybody, a tech company has fed their children, is intentionally fed, and it's intentionally going to produce that effect of feeding your child such a thing. And so that element of it now on a triple emotional, intellectual, and semantic makes me think the crisis is even worse. So thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Well, what do you know? Unanimous. I'm still a yes. Gosh, we've covered a lot of different aspects of bias, right? How they're trained, how they reinforce pre-existing bias, how we can atrophy, right? Our emotions, our skills for human connection, our courage, perhaps, and even willing to get in the ring. And thank you for that, Jake. When I told people about this podcast when we were first doing it, every single person would be like, "That's amazing." I don't want people to be shocked that we're having this kind of conversation. That shouldn't be shocking to people that that's even still possible. But I do think one of the reasons the use case for let's just call it like AI coaching works is, we're probably more alike than we think in terms of our desires and our challenges. And so the ability for AI to just hold up a mirror is actually, I think, already more or less been accomplished. What's less clear is, can it solve more complex psychological challenges or offer advice, or that's where I think we get into much more
dangerous territory. Well, thank
That's
you
right.
guys for being human beings, and mirroring and mirror complimenting and mirror contrasting throughout this
Yeah.
conversation. I appreciate you guys so much. Nice to meet you, Jake.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys. I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jake.
All right, stop recording.